Have you ever wanted something so badly, but life kept telling you no? This is the story of a young man who started with nothing but a dream and changed everything. Stick around, because this story might just change the way you look at hard work forever. Welcome to English Tone, the channel where stories aren't just stories. They're your path to better English and a better life. Let's dive in. In the heart of a quiet mountain town, surrounded by towering peaks and lush valleys, lived a young man named Ethan Parker. He was 20 years old, full of energy and big dreams, but the world around him seemed to hold little promise. Ethan's town was small, and like most small towns, opportunities were few. The houses were simple, and the streets were mostly quiet, except for the sound of the wind rushing through the trees or the occasional laughter of children playing. Ethan was a dreamer. He didn't want just a regular job like the other young people in town. He had bigger ambitions. Ethan wanted to own a chain of restaurants, not just one, but several across the country. He wanted to be an entrepreneur, someone who made his own way in the world, creating jobs and opportunities for others. He saw himself as a success, surrounded by people who respected him for what he had built with his own hands and determination. But the reality of Ethan's life was very different. His family lived in a modest home on the edge of town. His father, Rick, worked long hours as a mechanic, fixing cars and machines in a small, run-down garage. It wasn't easy work, and it didn't pay much. His mother, Diana, cleaned houses. For the town's wealthier families, scrubbing floors and washing dishes for a little extra cash. It was hard work, too, but the money she earned was barely enough to cover the bills and buy food. Ethan's younger sister, Lily, was only 10 years old, but she looked up to him like he was the greatest person in the world. She would sit by his side as he worked on his dreams, listening to his ideas about restaurants and how one day he would own a business that would change their lives forever. Lily admired her brother and believed in him more than anyone else. One evening, as winter's chill began to settle over the town, Ethan sat outside their small home. The stars above glittered in the clear night sky, and the air was cold and crisp. Ethan pulled his jacket tighter around his body, his mind racing. He had big plans, dreams that felt bigger than anything the town had ever seen. But there was one problem. His family didn't have money. They barely had enough to make it through the week. How could he possibly start a business with so little? I want to give my family a better life. But how do I start when we have so little? He whispered to himself, staring up at the sky. The stars seemed so far away, like his dreams, distant and almost impossible to reach. Ethan had always been a hard worker. He helped his dad with repairs at the garage and spent his free time mowing lawns or doing odd jobs around town. But no matter how hard he worked, there was never enough money to make his dreams a reality. That night, as he sat alone, he began to feel a sense of frustration creeping into his thoughts. Was it even possible to change his life? Was it possible to build something from nothing? When Ethan shared his concerns with his father the next morning, Rick listened carefully. He didn't offer empty promises or try to sugarcoat things. Instead, he gave Ethan a piece of advice that would stay with him for the rest of his life. "Dreams aren't free, son," Rick said, his voice steady and calm. "If you want something, you have to fight for it, even if it's small. Start with what you have, no matter how little it seems. The world won't hand you anything. You have to earn it One step at a time. Those words stuck with Ethan. He knew his father was right. Success wasn't going to fall into his lap. It wasn't going to be handed to him on a silver platter. If Ethan wanted to make something of himself, he had to take action, no matter how small the first step might be. That afternoon, as Ethan walked through the town, he began to think more about his father's advice. His mind buzzed with possibilities. He had always been good at coming up with ideas, but now he needed something practical, something he could start with. As he walked past the small bakery in the town square, an idea struck him. People in his town loved fresh bread. Every morning they would leave early to drive to the nearest bakery, which was miles away, just to buy a loaf or two. But there was no bakery in the town itself. Ethan realized that he could fill this gap. He could start selling fresh bread right here in the heart of the town. It seemed like a small idea, but it was something he could do now, something that didn't require a lot of money to start. But there was one problem. Ethan didn't have any money to buy bread. He didn't have the funds to rent a space or pay for supplies. He would need help to make this idea work. Ethan decided to visit Mr. Anderson, the owner of the bakery in the next town over. Mr. Anderson was a grumpy old man, known for being cautious with his business and skeptical of anyone who didn't have money. But Ethan was determined. He knew that if he could get Mr. Anderson to trust him, he might be able to make his dream a reality. The next day, Ethan set off early in the morning, walking the long miles to Mr. Anderson's bakery. His heart pounded with nervous energy as he approached the old man's shop. Mr. Anderson looked up from behind the counter as Ethan walked in. "But if you trust me for 1 week, I promise I'll sell it, return your money, and keep a small profit." Mr. Anderson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "And why should I trust you, young man?" he asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "Because I'm determined," he said. "I'm willing to work hard to prove myself. I want to give my family a better life, and I won't stop until I've earned it." The old man stared at Ethan for a long moment, his eyes narrowing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Anderson spoke. "All right, I'll give you the bread for 1 week, but if you fail to pay me back, don't come back here again." Ethan's heart leaped with excitement, and he nodded. "I won't let you down, sir. Thank you." With the bread in hand, Ethan rushed back to his town, eager to start his new venture. He set up a small stand near the park, hoping that enough people would notice and buy from him. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the warm loaves on the table, but his excitement outweighed his nerves. "Fresh bread, warm and delicious," he called out to anyone passing by, his voice full of energy. At first, people hesitated. They weren't sure if they should buy from this young man standing in front of a small cart. But Ethan was determined. He offered free samples, and slowly the townspeople started to trust him. By the end of the day, his stand was empty, and he had made a small profit. Ethan couldn't believe it. He had done it. He had taken the first step. He walked back to Mr. Anderson's bakery that evening and paid the old man back, just as he had promised. Mr. Anderson was surprised. "You kept your word," he said, nodding. "Come back tomorrow." Ethan left the bakery that day feeling proud, but he knew this was just the beginning. He had a long way to go if he wanted to make his dream a reality. As the days passed, Ethan woke up early each morning, walked to Mr. Anderson's bakery, and carried the bread back to town. He sold it with passion, and his small stand quickly became popular. People in the town began to trust him more, and his sales grew. Ethan saved every penny he made, knowing that each step forward brought him closer to his ultimate goal. But just as Ethan thought things were going well, he realized something. The bread was great. But what if he could do more? What if he could make something better than just selling bread? What if he could bake it himself? The idea sparked something inside him, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. But with this new dream came new challenges. Ethan didn't know how to bake, and he didn't have the money to invest in an oven or equipment. He was faced with another tough choice: to stay where he was, comfortable with his small success, or take a risk and try something bigger. He didn't have to think for long. Ethan knew that dreams weren't free, and he was ready to fight for his future. He made up his mind to learn how to bake no matter the cost. This decision would set him on a new path, one filled with both risks and rewards. But before he could move forward, he knew there was someone who could help him: Mr. Anderson. The old man had been kind enough to give him the bread to sell, and now Ethan needed to ask for another favor. He needed to learn how to bake. As he walked back to the bakery that evening, Ethan's mind raced. Would Mr. Anderson agree to teach him? Would he be willing to share his knowledge? Ethan didn't know, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to give up now. Ethan Parker had always believed that nothing great would happen unless he took a risk. The idea of becoming an entrepreneur had been in his mind for as long as he could remember. And now, after successfully selling the bread in his town for a few days, he was ready to take the next step. He wanted to bake the bread himself, to control the process from start to finish, and maybe even experiment with his own recipes. But to do that, he needed to learn from someone who already knew how to bake, and the only person in the area who fit that description was Mr. Harris, the baker from the neighboring town. Mr. Harris wasn't exactly known for being approachable. In fact, he had a reputation for being a grumpy old man who didn't trust anyone. He had been in the baking business for decades, perfecting his craft, and had no interest in helping someone like Ethan, a young dreamer with big ideas but no experience. Despite the challenges ahead, Ethan's resolve didn't waver. He had already proven he could sell the bread and return the money to Mr. Anderson. But now, the real challenge was about to begin. He had to convince Mr. Harris to teach him how to bake, to trust him enough to share the secrets of his craft. The journey to, Mr. Harris's bakery wasn't short. Ethan had to walk several miles to reach the neighboring town. The cold wind whipped through the trees as he walked, but Ethan barely noticed it. His mind was focused solely on the task at hand, making the deal with the grumpy baker. When he finally reached the bakery, he saw Mr. Harris behind the counter, kneading dough with skilled hands. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, making Ethan's stomach growl. He had been so focused on his goal that he hadn't even realized how hungry he was. Mr. Harris didn't look up as Ethan entered. He continued his work, the rhythmic movement of his hands speaking of years of experience. "Mr. Harris," Ethan said, trying to sound confident, "I want to sell your bread in my town. I've been selling bread for a few days now, and I'm doing well. But I want to take it to the next level. I want to bake the bread myself." The old baker finally stopped what he was doing and looked up at Ethan. His eyes narrowed, and he set down the dough, wiping his hands on his apron. "Why should I trust you?" Mr. Harris asked. his voice low and suspicious. Ethan took a deep breath. This was the moment. He knew that he couldn't give up now. He had come all this way, and he wasn't about to back down. "Because I'll work harder than anyone," Ethan replied, his voice steady. "I can't pay up front, but give me a week. I'll sell your bread in my town, return the money, and keep a small profit. If you don't think I'm capable after that, I won't bother you again." Mr. Harris stared at Ethan for what seemed like forever, the silence stretching between them. Ethan stood tall, holding his ground. He could feel the weight of the baker's gaze on him, as if Mr. Harris were searching for something. Some sign of sincerity, perhaps, or maybe a hint of weakness. But Ethan wasn't afraid. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Mr. Harris spoke. "All right," he said, his voice gruff. "I'll give you a chance. But if you fail, don't come crawling back here." Ethan's heart raced with excitement, but he kept his cool. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. I won't disappoint you." The next day, Ethan returned to his town with the bread, determined to make the most of this opportunity. He set up his small stand again, just as he had done before, but this time he had something to prove. He didn't just want to sell the bread. He wanted to show Mr. Harris that he could be trusted, that he had the work ethic to succeed. Ethan's energy was contagious. He greeted every customer with a smile, offering free samples of the fresh bread. He made sure to thank each person who bought from him, and he worked tirelessly from morning until evening, never slowing down. His passion for his work was evident, and soon more and more people stopped by his stand. The bread was fresh, warm, and delicious, and Ethan's enthusiasm made it even more appealing. By evening, Ethan had sold every loaf of bread. His pocket was a little fuller, and he felt a sense of pride in his work. He had done it. He had kept his word. He had returned the money to Mr. Harris just as he promised. The next day, Ethan went back to Mr. Harris's bakery, carrying the money from the previous day's sales. The old baker looked up from his work as Ethan entered, and for the first time, there was a hint of respect in his eyes. "You kept your word," Mr. Harris said, nodding approvingly. "Come back tomorrow." Ethan left the bakery that day feeling a surge of excitement. It was only the beginning, but it felt like a huge step forward. He was no longer just a dreamer. He was becoming a man of action. He had proven that he could follow through on his promises, and now he had earned Mr. Harris's trust. Over the next few weeks, Ethan continued to sell the bread in his town. Each day, he woke up early, walked to Mr. Harris's bakery, and carried the bread back to his stand. The routine was tiring, but it was also rewarding. Ethan was making money, building relationships with the people in his town, and learning more about what it took to run a business. But deep down, Ethan knew that he wanted more. He wanted to bake the bread himself, to be in control of the process from start to finish. He wanted to learn the secrets of the craft, to master the art of baking. One day after finishing his work for the day, Ethan returned to Mr. Harris's bakery. This time, he wasn't just there to buy bread. He was there to ask for something more. "Mr. Harris," Ethan began, "I've been selling your bread for a while now, and I've learned a lot, but I want to take the next step. I want to learn how to bake. Will you teach me?" Mr. Harris looked at Ethan for a long moment. The baker's face was as serious as ever, but this time there was no suspicion in his eyes. Instead, there was something else, something that resembled approval. "Why do you want to learn?" Mr. Harris asked, his voice quieter than usual. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because I want to build something of my own. I want to create something that will last, and I want to give my family a better life." Mr. Harris studied him for a moment longer before nodding slowly. "All right," he said. "I'll teach you, but you'll have to work hard. Baking isn't easy. It takes patience, skill, and a lot of practice." Ethan's heart leaped with excitement. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "Thanks you, Mr. Harris," Ethan said, his voice full of gratitude. "I'll work harder than ever." The next day, Ethan began his training with Mr. Harris. It wasn't easy. At first, he struggled to get the dough just right, and there were many times when he felt frustrated. But Mr. Harris was patient with him, showing him the steps and explaining the techniques. Slowly, Ethan began to improve. He learned how to knead the dough, how to time the baking just right, and how to create the perfect loaf of bread. As the weeks passed, Ethan grew more and more confident in his baking skills. He still sold Mr. Harris's bread in his town, but now he had a new goal: to bake his own bread, to create something unique that would set him apart from other bakers. One day, after a long day of training, Ethan sat down with Mr. Harris, who was cleaning up the bakery. They didn't talk much, but Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. He had come so far since that first day when he had walked into the bakery, full of dreams and doubts. But even as Ethan worked hard to master the art of baking, he knew that there was still much more to learn. There were still challenges ahead, still obstacles to overcome. And the road to his dream of owning a chain of restaurants was long and uncertain. Yet Ethan was no longer afraid. He had taken the first step, and now there was no turning back. As he left the bakery that evening, Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. He had learned how to bake, and he had earned Mr. Harris's trust. But what would he do next? How could he turn his newfound skills into something bigger? The questions swirled in his mind as he walked home. But one thing was clear. He wasn't done yet. He was just getting started. And in his heart, he knew that the best was yet to come. Ethan had always been an early riser. The town was still asleep when he left his house at 4 a.m. every morning. The chill of the morning air nipped at his face as he walked the long road to the bakery, his heart set on the task ahead. Each day he repeated the same routine. Buy the bread from Mr. Harris, set up his stall, and sell it to the people in his town. It was hard work, but he enjoyed the rhythm of it, the connection he had with his customers, and the small sense of pride that came with making his family a little bit better off. Over time, Ethan had saved up a decent amount of money. Enough, in fact, to buy something that would take his business to the next level, a small cart. The cart would allow him to sell his bread more efficiently, move around town more easily, and perhaps even venture into nearby areas. It was a small step, but a crucial one. Ethan was learning that even small changes could make a big difference when it came to business. One day, as he was preparing his cart to head out for the day, a customer stopped by and looked at him with a curious smile. "You've been selling Mr. Harris's bread for a while now, haven't you?" the customer asked. Ethan nodded, offering the man a warm loaf. "Yes, I've been selling his bread for a while now. People love it. I'm doing okay." The man seemed to think for a moment, then asked, "Well, why don't you bake your own bread? You'd make more profit that way." The suggestion was simple, but it sent a shock through Ethan's body. He had never considered it before. The idea of baking his own bread, of stepping into Mr. Harris's world and learning the craft that had been perfected over decades, was exciting and terrifying all at once. He had been selling bread for months, but had no idea how to bake it. The thought of taking that step, of shifting from selling to baking, was daunting. But it was also the opportunity he had been waiting for. It was the next logical step, wasn't it? If he could bake his own bread, he wouldn't have to rely on Mr. Harris, and he could have full control over his product and his profits. Ethan's mind was racing as the customer walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He felt the weight of the decision pressing on him. Could he really do it? Could he bake his own bread and make it as good as Mr. Harris's? The more he thought about it, the more excited he became. But there was one big obstacle: Mr. Harris himself. The old baker had been his mentor in selling bread, but baking it was a whole different world. Ethan wasn't sure how Mr. Harris would react to the idea. With newfound determination, Ethan made his way to the bakery later that day. As he walked inside, he found Mr. Harris, just as usual, kneading dough with the focused intensity of a master. At work. "Mr. Harris?" Ethan began hesitantly. "I've been thinking about baking my own bread." The old baker didn't look up from his work. "Oh? And what makes you think you can bake?" Ethan swallowed his nerves and said, "I think I can learn. I've been selling bread for a while now, and I feel like I'm ready for the next step. I want to bake my own bread." Mr. Harris paused for a moment, then finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "And why would I help you take business from me?" Ethan's heart sank. He knew Mr. Harris had a lot of pride in his work, and it made sense that he would be protective of it. But Ethan wasn't there to steal anything. He just wanted to learn. He took a deep breath, steadying his nerves. "I won't forget who gave me my first break," Ethan said earnestly. "If I succeed, I'll help your bakery too, I promise." For a long moment, Mr. Harris didn't say anything. He simply stared at Ethan, his weathered face unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, something that made Ethan believe that maybe, just maybe, Mr. Harris would help him. Finally, after a long pause, Mr. Harris spoke. "All right, I'll teach you, but don't think it's going to be easy. Baking is hard work. You'll fail, a lot, and you'll need to work harder than you've ever worked before. Do you think you're ready for that?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I'm ready." Mr. Harris gave him a curt nod. "Fine. But remember, it's not going to be pretty. You've got a lot to learn." Ethan left the bakery that day with a mix of excitement and fear. He was about to embark on a new chapter of his journey, and he wasn't sure what to expect. But he knew that it was his chance to truly take control of his future. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the bakery early, ready to start his first lesson in baking. Mr. Harris was already there, his hands working the dough with practiced ease. Ethan watched him closely, trying to absorb every movement, every technique. The old baker didn't explain much. Instead, he showed Ethan what to do, guiding his hands through the motions. At first, Ethan struggled. His hands felt awkward as he tried to knead the dough and the bread didn't rise properly. The first batch he made was a disaster. Flat, dense, and hard as a rock. He could feel his confidence slipping away with every failure. Each time he looked at the bread, he thought to himself, "Maybe I'm not cut out for this." Doubt started creeping into his mind. Maybe he wasn't good enough. Maybe he should just go back to selling other people's bread and leave the baking to the experts. But then he remembered his father's words. Dreams aren't free. He had to fight for his dreams. It wasn't going to be easy, but he couldn't give up now. Ethan pushed through the frustration, waking up earlier each day to practice. He baked batch after batch, trying different techniques, different ingredients, learning from his mistakes. Slowly, very slowly, his bread started to improve. The loaves became lighter, fluffier, and more consistent, but even then they weren't perfect. There were still burnt crusts and uneven textures. Every time Ethan thought he had finally gotten it right, something went wrong. He felt like he was walking in circles, trying to find his way but never quite reaching his goal. Still, he kept going. Every time he failed, he learned something new, and each new lesson brought him one step closer to mastering the craft. Days turned into weeks. Ethan grew stronger, both in body and mind. He could feel himself getting better, and that sense of improvement drove him to keep going. The loaves were starting to look better, but he still wasn't satisfied. Not yet. One afternoon, after a particularly long and exhausting day of baking, Mr. Harris walked into the bakery just as Ethan was finishing his last batch of bread. The baker took one look at the loaves and raised an eyebrow. Ethan's heart raced. He was used to Mr. Harris's harsh judgment, but this time there was something different. Mr. Harris picked up one of the loaves, inspecting it carefully. Then he looked at Ethan, his expression softening slightly. "This is perfect," Mr. Harris said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're ready." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. He had done it. He had finally mastered the craft. But he knew that this was just the beginning. There were still many more steps to take, many more challenges ahead. As he left the bakery that day, he felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep hunger for more. He was no longer just a dreamer. He was a baker. And the path to his future had never seemed clearer. But there was one more thing he needed. A place of his own. A place where he could truly begin to make his mark. Ethan didn't know how or when, but he knew one thing for sure. His journey had just begun. Ethan had worked hard to perfect his bread, and the fruits of his labor were beginning to pay off. His family supported him every step of the way. Lily, his little sister, took great pride in packing the loaves and making sure each one was wrapped carefully. Diana, his mother, had always been there for him, and now she helped by making tea for the customers who came by to buy his bread. It was a simple, humble operation, but it was growing, and that was all that mattered to Ethan. The smell of fresh bread filled their small home, and it made everything feel right. But then, a change came to town. A new bakery opened across the street from Ethan's small cart. It wasn't just any bakery. It was a flashy, modern place with bright lights, colorful decorations, and an assortment of fancy cakes that immediately caught the eye of anyone passing by. The bakery, owned by a man named Eric, had everything. Ethan's cart didn't. Eric seemed to have it all: a polished storefront, a sleek sign, and products that were as much about their appearance as they were about taste. At first, Ethan didn't worry. He had his loyal customers, and he was proud of his bread. But soon he began to notice something unsettling. More and more of his regulars started walking past his cart to visit Eric's bakery. The lines outside Eric's shop grew longer, while the people who had once come to buy Ethan's bread began to trickle away. Ethan's heart sank as he watched his customers disappear, one by one. What if this is the end? He thought, sitting in his cart one quiet afternoon, watching as Eric's bakery filled up with people. The fear of failure gnawed at him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. He had worked so hard to get here, but now it seemed like everything was slipping away. For the first time since he had started his business, Ethan considered giving up. Maybe he wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe Eric's bakery had something he just couldn't compete with. But deep down, Ethan knew he couldn't give up. His father's words echoed in his mind. Dreams aren't free. He had come this far because he refused to give up, and this new obstacle couldn't be the end of his journey. If he wanted to succeed, he needed to fight back. But not with anger or bitterness. He needed to be smart. Instead of sulking, Ethan decided to find out why people were flocking to Eric's bakery. He couldn't assume he knew the answer. He needed to hear it from the people themselves. So one morning, he gathered his courage and started asking his customers what they liked about the new bakery. Some were straightforward with their answers. "It's clean and colorful," one woman told him. "I like how it looks. It's so modern." Others were more specific. "The cakes look amazing," a man said as he glanced over at Eric's shop. "The decorations are so creative. I've never seen anything like it." Ethan listened carefully. He wasn't offended. Instead, he took note of every single detail. He knew he couldn't just continue doing the same thing and expect different results. If he wanted to compete, he had to adapt. But adapting didn't mean copying. It meant understanding what his customers wanted and delivering something they couldn't get anywhere else. That afternoon, Ethan set out to make some changes. He started with the easiest fix. He painted his cart. It wasn't a big makeover, but it was enough to make it look more appealing. He brightened up the colors, added a few simple designs, and gave the cart a fresh, clean look. It was a small step, but it made a difference. At least his cart didn't look as plain compared to the flashy storefront of Eric's bakery. Next, Ethan realized he needed to offer something that could compete with Eric's cakes. But Ethan had never decorated cakes before. He had no idea where to start. However, he wasn't going to let that stop him. Ethan went straight to the library and found books on cake decorating. He spent hours flipping through the pages, learning how to make frosting flowers, how to pipe intricate designs, and how to make cakes as beautiful as they were delicious. It wasn't easy. His first attempts at decorating cakes were nothing short of disastrous. The frosting was lumpy, the flowers looked more like blobs, and the cakes didn't come out the way he had imagined. But Ethan didn't give up. He practiced every chance he got. Slowly, the cakes began to look better. The icing was smoother, the designs more delicate, and the cakes themselves tasted just as good as they looked. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step in the right direction. And that was all Ethan needed. He wasn't trying to outdo Eric. He just wanted to offer something unique that his customers would appreciate. Ethan didn't stop there. He began offering free samples of his new cakes to anyone who passed by his cart. He would hand them a small slice and ask, "What do you think?" It was a way to get people to stop and try his product, to remind them why they had liked his bread. and cakes in the first place. And slowly but surely, it worked. Customers began returning one by one. They didn't come all at once, but they started trickling back, and that was enough for Ethan to keep going. One afternoon, as Ethan was packing up his cart, an elderly lady walked up to him. She was a regular who had been coming to his cart since the very beginning. Her eyes were kind, but there was something else in them, a look of quiet wisdom. "You didn't give up," she said, smiling softly. "That's why we trust you." Her words hit Ethan harder than he expected. It wasn't just about the bread or the cakes. It was about persistence, about showing his customers that he was someone they could rely on. That was what mattered the most. He wasn't trying to be better than Eric. He was just trying to be the best version of himself, and that was what people respected. With renewed confidence, Ethan continued working. Slowly but surely, he regained his customer base. The painted cart, the cakes, and the personal touch all made a difference. But more than anything, it was the lesson he had learned, the importance of never giving up, that kept him moving forward. Ethan knew that the battle wasn't over. He had taken the first step, but there was still so much more to learn and to do. One evening, after a long day of baking and selling, Ethan sat on the porch with Lily and Diana. He looked out at the town, watching the sunset paint the sky with shades of orange and pink. It had been a tough few weeks, but he had learned something invaluable. The fight wasn't about being the flashiest or the most perfect. It was about persistence, creativity, and the willingness to adapt. But deep down, Ethan knew that this was just one chapter of his journey. There was more to come, more obstacles, more opportunities, and more lessons to learn. And he was ready for all of it. As he sat there with his family, he couldn't help but think about what the future held. He had started with nothing but a dream, and now he was in a battle for his place in the town. The question wasn't whether he would succeed. It was how he would continue to grow, learn, and adapt to the changing world around him. Ethan had finally felt like things were. Ethan stood outside in the pouring rain, his clothes soaked, watching the fire turn his dreams to ash. His mind felt numb, and for the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do next. The next day, word spread quickly throughout the town. People whispered behind their hands, sharing the news of the fire and wondering if this was the end for Ethan. The bakery had been a beacon of hope for many, and now it was gone. They wondered if Ethan would be able to rebuild, or if this was a sign that he should give up. For days, the town was filled with uncertainty, as if the future had been ripped away in one night of disaster. But through it all, Ethan refused to give in. He couldn't. The pain of losing his bakery was deep, but he knew that giving up was not an option. He had come too far. He had fought too hard. And in his heart, he knew this wasn't the end. It was just another test, another obstacle to overcome. One morning, as he stood in front of the charred remains of his bakery, staring at the destruction, Ethan felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to see the familiar face of Mr. Harris, the old baker who had first taught him how to bake. Now retired, Mr. Harris had been a silent supporter of Ethan's journey since the beginning. He had watched as Ethan grew from a boy, with big dreams, into a young man who was on the verge of making those dreams a reality. Seeing Ethan now, standing among the ashes of his bakery, made the old man's heart ache. "Mr. Harris," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with defeat. "I don't know what to do. Everything I've worked for is gone." Mr. Harris didn't speak right away. Instead, he studied Ethan's face, his eyes wise and knowing. Then he put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and said, "What would you do if you were me?" Ethan stared at him, confused by the question. "What do you mean?" "You've always had the answer inside you," Mr. Harris said gently. "This is just another test. You've made it this far, and you've proven that you have what it takes. You've built something out of nothing before, and you can do it again. It's not about the bakery, Ethan. It's about you. You have the strength to rebuild. Don't forget that." Ethan stood there in silence, letting the weight of the old man's words sink in. He had never looked at things that way before. He had always focused on the physical things, the bakery, the bread, the cakes, the cart. But what Mr. Harris was telling him was that his strength didn't lie in his bakery. It lay in his heart, his determination, and his refusal to give up, no matter the odds. With renewed resolve, Ethan made a decision. He would rebuild, not just for himself, but for the people who had supported him along the way. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Ethan knew that nothing worth having ever came easily. He had worked hard to get to this point, and he wasn't about to let a fire stop him. In the days that followed, Ethan set to work. He started baking again, this time in his home. He didn't have the fancy equipment or the space he once had, but he had the most important thing: the support of his family and his neighbors. Word spread quickly that Ethan was starting over, and people came to help. Some gave him ingredients. Others donated money, and many offered their time to help him bake. It was a true community effort, and it reminded Ethan of why he had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't just about the bread or the business. It was about the people who had believed in him from the beginning and who now stood by him, ready to help him rise from the ashes. It wasn't long before Ethan had enough to reopen his bakery. This time, though, things were different. The new bakery was brighter, better, and stronger than before. It had everything Ethan had, learned from his past mistakes, and all the things that had made his bakery special to the people who had supported him. He added new items to the menu like cupcakes, muffins, and pastries. And of course, there was still his famous bread. The reopening was a huge success. The town mayor himself came to the opening, and he had a few words to say. "Ethan," he said, "you've inspired us all. You've shown us that no matter how hard life gets, there's always a way forward if you're willing to fight for it." Ethan stood proudly, feeling the weight of the mayor's words. But then he spoke, his voice steady and strong. "Nothing in life is free. Not success, not respect, not love. Everything must be earned through effort. It's been a long road to get here, but I'm not stopping. I'll keep working, keep fighting, and keep doing what I love." The people applauded, and Ethan felt a sense of pride that he had never known before. His bakery wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a symbol of hope for the people of the town. People came from all over to see the boy who never gave up. They came to hear his story, to taste his bread, and to be reminded that no matter how tough life got, there was always a way to rise again. In the end, Ethan realized that his journey had never been about the bakery. It had been about the lessons he had learned along the way, the importance of persistence, the power of community, and the value of never giving up, no matter what obstacles stood in his way. And with that, Ethan's dream had finally come true. He wasn't just a baker anymore. He was a symbol of resilience, a reminder that no matter how many times life knocks you down, as long as you keep getting up, there's always a way to find success. If Ethan's story inspired you, give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment with your dream, and subscribe to English Tone for more real stories that help you grow your English and your mindset.